of hurricane and wildfire preparation season. I am Stephanie Levis with the Toronto Star. I will be moderating this afternoon's press conference. For my reporter colleagues, I remind you that it is one question, one follow-up for the question and answer portion. I also ask that everybody speaks slowly and clearly as possible to assist our friends, the interpreters, and to avoid any injury to them. We have a number of ministers with us today, as well as parliamentary secretaries. Each will be speaking for, I'm told, about 3 minutes apiece, and then we'll be moving to questions after. I will leave it over to you. Thank you, ministers and parliamentary secretaries.
Good afternoon. Bon après-midi. Tout d'abord, je tiens à reconnaître que je suis sur le territoire traditionnel du peuple Mohawk, Kanien'kehá:ka. Merci de vous joindre à nous. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour faire un état des lieux sur la situation actuelle des feux de forêt et celle des ouragans qui commencent au Canada. You will hear a situational update as well as advice on how Canadians can prepare and protect themselves. Like all Canadians, our thoughts are first and foremost with those who have tragically lost their lives battling wildfires this season. Tom Firth, the helicopter pilot who died protecting the community of Fort Good Hope in Northwest Territories, and Morgan Kitchen, the firefighter who was killed while battling a blaze in Jasper. The courage and sacrifice of these heroes will not be forgotten. Our hearts go out to their families and their loved ones, as well as to those who are left to continue the fight. On behalf of all Canadians, we are so grateful for the round-the-clock work being done to protect our communities. Qu'il s'agisse de surveiller l'activité des incendies, d'aider les personnes évacuées ou de combattre les flammes en première ligne. Ce travail n'est pas facile et nous ne pouvons trop vous remercier. To those who have had to evacuate their homes or have lost their belongings in the fires, rest assured the Government of Canada is here for you. A full list of federal supports can be found on the Government of Canada website. With that, I will now turn it over to Minister Sajjan. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Sherry. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm coming to you virtually from the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Now, beginning with an update on wildfires, there is significant fire activity in British Columbia with evacuation orders in place for several regions. The ongoing dry and windy conditions in the Northwest Territories are creating conditions favorable for fire growth and severe firefighting challenges. Now, regarding Jasper, I have approved a second request for assistance that will provide additional support to Alberta until August 15th. We are grateful for the assistance of over 700 international firefighters from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Mexico, and the United States, Costa Rica, and South Africa, with more than 600 of them working in Alberta. Like all Canadians, our thoughts are with the many residents in Jasper and elsewhere still unable to return to their homes and those in communities across the country who have suffered unimaginable losses. Our thoughts are also with those who have tragically lost their lives battling the wildfires this season, including the recent passing of the firefighter from Calgary who died courageously fighting the wildfires flames in Jasper. Nationally to date, there are now 474 active wildfires burning. Over 3.4 million hectares have burned so far. This is about an average for our fire season, but of course the season is not over yet. The Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center's national preparedness level is at 5. While wildfires are top of mind this year for everyone, we are also in the thick of hurricane season as well. We stand ready to provide assistance to Ontario and Quebec after the flooding and power outages caused by Hurricane Debbie. And we are keeping a very close eye on developing storms and their potential impacts on Canadians. The good news is that we know how to protect ourselves against these threats. So make sure you have an emergency kit and a family emergency plan and assess your property for preparedness. That means, for example, clearing dead trees or branches, ensuring your roofs, windows, and foundations are in good repair, and considering installing storm shutters. Now, this does have a huge impact when it comes to Fire Smart. Stay connected to weather alert services and know the difference between a storm or hurricane watch versus a warning. Now, watch means conditions are favorable, while a warning means the weather event is happening. Now you can visit getprepared.ca for more tips on how to prepare yourself and for your families. It is imperative to take these actions to build disaster resilience now. Now is the operative word before disaster strikes, before danger is on our doorstep. Now is the best time to prepare in the event that emergencies occur. And the Government of Canada is preparing as well of those seasonal disasters by investing in adaptation measures. That includes initiatives under the National Adaptation Strategy, like a national public alerting system and a low-cost federal flood insurance program. Emergency management is also strengthened by increasing our focus on disaster prevention and mitigation. This will help us not only to avoid disasters, but also it significantly reduces the social, economic, cultural, and environmental costs and damages when events do occur. So let's enjoy the rest of the summer, but make sure that we are prepared as the sun continues to shine. Thank you very much. Now I'll turn it over to Minister Wilkinson.
Thank you, Harj, and good morning, everyone. I am also joining you from Vancouver, which is on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. We talk a lot about climate change these days. The planet, as folks are seeing, is effectively burning up, and climate change is a significant factor. As most folks know, last summer, Canadians experienced the most destructive forest fire season in our country's history. And just a few weeks ago, we all saw the devastating images out of Jasper. And we mourn the loss of a firefighter who sacrificed his life battling this wildfire. Le gouvernement fédéral travaille agressivement pour s'assurer que le Canada est prêt à réagir aux incendies de forêt alors que nous entrons dans une saison marquée par des niveaux élevés d'activité liés aux feux de forêt. Earlier today, Government of Canada experts led a wildfire forecasting briefing to share what the data is telling us this wildfire season will potentially look like in the months ahead. As of today, there are 474 active wildfires being responded to, and over 3.4 million hectares have been burned thus far this year. In 2024, we are already above the 25-year average of area burned. Dans l'ouest du Canada en particulier, les conditions de sécheresse sont les plus intenses à partir de maintenant jusqu'à la fin de la saison. Bien que les pluies opportunes empêchent les incendies de se propager dans de nombreuses régions du pays, les feux de forêt se poursuivront dans l'ouest du Canada au cours des 2 prochains mois. For August, the predominant area of anticipated activity includes Yukon, Northwest Territories, British Columbia, Alberta, and parts of Saskatchewan, approaching the border with Manitoba. It is not unusual for Western Canada to see high levels of fire activity this time of year. However, forecasting anticipates that activity will be above average in parts of the West to well above average in areas in BC and Alberta. In September, above normal wildfire activity is expected to continue from Western and Southern British Columbia through the Central Prairies and Western Manitoba. This, of course, underscores the importance of wildfire mitigation and of adaptation. A few months ago, we joined together with the provinces and territories to collectively launch the Canadian Wildfire Prevention and Mitigation Strategy, which recognizes the importance of mobilizing whole of society actions toward wildland fire resilience. The strategy identifies activities that will allow us to proactively and collectively plan and prepare for wildland fires, recognizing that contributions and implementation will vary across Canada based on existing programs and diverse needs. For its part, the federal government has made significant and long-term investments since 2015. Certainly, the $28 million that we have dedicated to the training of additional forest firefighters, we are on track to meet that goal well ahead of schedule. An $800,000 increase in funding that is bolstering the International Association of Firefighters program that is focused on training municipal firefighters to help us in the wildland municipal interface. Dans le cadre du budget 2024, nous doublons le crédit d'impôt pour les pompiers volontaires qui passera de 3 000 à 6 000 $. And last year we announced and then we fast-tracked agreements with provinces and territories to deliver the $256 million equipment fund that we committed to assisting the provinces and territories with. We have now signed agreements with almost every province to support this season's wildfire efforts. Under this fund, just last week, we announced a major joint investment with Alberta of $57 million for forest firefighting equipment. Of this funding, $5 million had already purchased equipment that is currently helping firefighters battle the ongoing fires in that province, with equipment that includes aircraft parts, general wildfire equipment, including pumps and hoses, telecommunications equipment such as radios and transmitters, and a range of other things. And today, I am announcing a new joint investment of $64 million with the province of Ontario to purchase more wildfire equipment, and to keep Ontarians safe. En Ontario, nous constatons heureusement cette année une saison des feux inférieure à la moyenne. Pour la première fois depuis des années, c'est l'occasion d'investir dans l'équipement et les compétences dont nous avons besoin pour faire face aux futures saisons de feux de forêt. With this new equipment, Ontario has already begun purchasing life-saving equipment, including pumps, weather stations, boats, trailers, and ATVs. Wildfires have, as you know, occurred across Canada for many, many years. What is new is their frequency and their intensity. Looking at September's above normal fire activity is significant because while wildfire season often winds down at the end of August or early September, this data points to longer and more extreme fire seasons. Area burned by fires is growing. This is pushing what we consider normal to a whole different level. The science is clear. Climate change is fueling these fires. Les données scientifiques sont claires. Les changements climatiques alimentent ces incendies. And that is why Canada has one of the most comprehensive climate plans and why we are continuing to move forward on implementing it each and every day. Certainly, government's most immediate priority must be to protect Canadian lives and livelihood, and increasingly, this starts with accepting the scientific reality of climate change and taking thoughtful, impactful actions to address it. I would say with some sadness that unfortunately such acceptance is not shared by all political leaders at the federal level. In fact, it is clear that Mr. Poilievre either does not believe in climate change or just does not think it's very important. After last year's devastating fires, perhaps Canadians were assuming he would recognize that we are already feeling the impacts of climate change very much here and now. Mais alors que les Canadiens sont toujours aux prises avec ces tragédies, certains politiciens continuent à faire comme si de rien n'était. Mr. Poilievre's plan, as I have said before, for the environment is effectively to act the facts and to simply let the planet burn. His position is uninformed, it is irresponsible, and it is reckless. Climate change is a science issue. It should not be a political or a partisan issue. That is why Canadians deserve and expect thoughtful actions from politicians about the risks that climate change poses to our children's future, to our economy, and to our communities. And that is exactly what this government has done and will do tomorrow and the next day and the next. Thank you very much for joining us today. Merci beaucoup. And I will now pass it over to my colleague, Minister Hutchings.
Thank you, Jonathan. Friends, I'm joining you today from the traditional territories of diverse and Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge and respect the diverse histories and cultures of the Beothuk, the Mi'kmaq, Innu, and the Inuit of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I too want to pass along my condolences to the fireman that lost his life. And I'm here in Burgeo, Newfoundland and Labrador, that was devastated by Hurricane Fiona just 2 years ago, where people lost everything. They lost their homes, they lost their businesses, and friends, they lost their memories. And people are still rebuilding. 2 years later, they're still rebuilding. And sadly, friends, the reality is, as my colleagues have said, this year we're expecting an above average hurricane season. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA as we call it, has predicted up to 24 named storms, that's tropical storms, 13 hurricanes, and 7 major hurricanes. That's the most that NOAA has ever predicted in its spring update. The average number of storms is about 14 per year. And we just recently saw Tropical Storm Debbie, and that reminded us that we need to get ready. We saw significant power disruptions in Quebec, road closures and flooding in Quebec and Ontario, and significant rainfall in Quebec and here at home in Western Newfoundland as well. But your federal government has been there, friends. We've invested in new radar and network systems to give more detailed information on storms. The Hurricane Fiona Recovery Fund stepped up. We helped communities purchase generators and supplies for comfort centers to be prepared for when the next event happens. We've rebuilt wharves, piers, and breakwaters, and we've built them stronger and higher to withstand more and powerful storms, because we know the wharves and the infrastructure is there to help the economy of these coastal communities. We've also invested in the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, the search and rescue volunteer associations in Canada, so they are ready when disaster strikes, and they're helping to prepare communities. So friends, heading into this hurricane season, please make sure you are prepared. Watch the weather. Pay attention to the local news and emergency services. And I encourage every community and everyone to have an emergency plan in place. And please, friends, listen to your first responders. And we have to thank them each and every day, from the volunteer fire departments to the search and rescues to the community leaders to the Red Cross, the St. John Ambulance, the services that go out to come and help in times of need. Please thank them, because they are there for us each and every day. So let's be prepared for this hurricane season that's coming. And now I'd like to turn it over to Jenica Atwin, the Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, and nice to see my colleagues today. And even though it's a tough conversation to have, it's certainly important to be here. So I am joining from the unceded, unsurrendered Williston-Galliag territory here in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And I'm here to represent, of course, Indigenous Services Canada, because once again, First Nations are experiencing the frontline impacts of climate change, with 80% of their communities at risk of wildfires. As of August 11th, this season, wildfires have impacted 74 First Nation communities across the country. Right now, 29 communities are currently impacted. This has resulted in the evacuation of 21 First Nation communities since the spring. As we speak, 7 are still evacuated. So in total, since April 1st, 2024, over 9,000 First Nation members have been evacuated due to wildland fires. For those 2,492 evacuated people who are concerned about their communities, about their homes, their way of being, climate change is an undeniable reality. Pour ces 2,492 personnes évacuées qui sont préoccupées de leur communauté, de leur maison et de leur mode de vie, le changement climatique est une réalité indéniable. The situation was especially difficult in Little Red River Cree Nation, where all communities were evacuated. I know there are some members who had stayed behind with fire and water trucks ready to intervene if needed, and I want to thank them, miigwech. To support their efforts, we sent $15 million in advance payments to their communities. We also provide funding through the Red Cross to support First Nations facing those wildfires. For example, Red Sucker Lake was able to buy generators. A wildfire was dangerously close to their community, and the generator prevented any major power outage. So this is a concrete result of our approach to following the leads of our partners and meeting them where their specific needs are. To everyone who is evacuated, know this: you are not forgotten. We will be there with you. We will be there to support your efforts to protect your communities and, of course, to rebuild. This year, we're doing more in supporting First Nations leadership and self-determination because, of course, they know what they need best. We're providing funding to help communities face wildfires and be better prepared. As we speak, there is funding to hire emergency management coordinators in every single First Nation in Alberta and Manitoba, and many more across the country. We also increase funding of other programs, including Fire Smart, non-structural mitigation and preparedness, and capacity enhancement. This enables communities to take the lead when it matters most, with the tools that they need the most. Ça veut dire que les communautés ont les outils nécessaires pour se protéger. Parce que quand les communautés ont ce qu'il faut, on sauve des vies. Prenons l'exemple de la Première Nation d'Oig River en Colombie-Britannique. En mai, elle a dû être évacuée. Au bout de 14 jours, les gens ont pu revenir à la maison. This is a challenging summer, and I know that First Nations are anxious. But let me say this, once again, Canada stands with you. We will be at your side before, during, and after wildfires, and we will cover every single dollar of eligible costs that you encounter. Take care and be safe. Miigwech, Wuliwin, merci. And I'll now pass it to my colleague, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Jenica. Bonjour, good afternoon to everyone, and I am talking with you from Toronto, which is the traditional territories of many Indigenous people, including the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Chippewas people, and land that is on treaty land with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So far this summer, many Canadian regions have experienced dry and hot weather, which creates conditions for wildfires, especially in regions at risk, such as Jasper, where a devastating wildfire has destroyed 30% of the town, and where a firefighter tragically lost his life while fighting the flames. And I'd like to join my colleagues in expressing my deepest condolences to his loved ones. My thoughts right now are with the residents, staff, and visitors of Jasper. Their security remains our priority. And our main priority, our main concern is for people's safety. We are asking Canadians to get the WeatherCan app on your smartphones. This app will alert you in the event of extreme weather, including extreme heat and hurricanes and poor air quality. Pour ce qui reste de la saison estivale, je vous conseille de télécharger l'appli MétéoCan sur vos téléphones intelligents. L'appli vous donne des alertes dans le cas de conditions météorologiques extrêmes, y compris la chaleur extrême et les ouragans. L'appli MétéoCan vous offre aussi des renseignements sur la cote de Air Santé. Scientists at Environment and Climate Change Canada tell us that climate change is a factor in increasing dry, hot summer conditions. In June, Environment and Climate Change Canada introduced a new rapid extreme weather event attribution system. Climate scientists can now quickly calculate to what extent human-caused global warming contributed to the likelihood of a heat wave. Today, Environment and Climate Change Canada released their analysis for all the heat waves that impacted Canada in June and July using the new system. Scientists were able to determine that human-caused climate change made these heat waves much more likely, anywhere from 2 to 10 times more likely. Prolonged heat waves are a major contributor to more intense wildfires across Canada. The 2023 wildfires in Canada burned almost 15 million hectares of forest and cost Canadians tens of billions of dollars in damages. These findings from the scientists give us a direct link between the intensity of these fires and the role of climate change. Les scientifiques de l'environnement et changement climatique ont appuyé leur nouveau système d'attribution rapide des phénomènes météorologiques extrêmes pour analyser les vagues de chaleur qui ont touché le Canada pendant le mois de juin et le mois de juillet. Ce système a établi que, dans chacun des vagues des chaleurs étudiées, les changements climatiques d'origine humaine avaient rendu les vagues de chaleur beaucoup plus probables. Cela signifie que l'influence humaine sur le climat a rendu ces phénomènes au moins 2 à 10 fois plus probables. The more knowledge we gain, the more we can adapt, and Canadians can rely on the scientists in Environment and Climate Change Canada, and their research informs our decisions. Je vous souhaite une belle fin d'été. Soyez prudents. Merci and thank you. Please enjoy a wonderful end to your summer, the last months of the summer, and please stay safe.
Thank you, ministers and colleagues. We will now open the virtual floor to questions. I ask all of the reporters on the line, if you have a question, please use the raise hand function on Zoom. I remind you all that it is a one question, one follow-up situation, but if we have time to circle back for further questions, we will do that. We have about 25 minutes for questions, and we will start with Zach Power from Global. Give me a sec, Zach, and I will unmute. There you go. Go ahead.
Thank you. Some municipalities say that their budgets can't keep up with the current rate of natural disasters. Looking at the peak in hurricane season, which is expected to come, do you think that we are acting proactively?
I can start with answering that. One is proactively, absolutely. We have been working very closely with Environment Canada to making sure that we have the right assets to be able to track the various hurricanes. That allows us with pretty good precision of exactly the path and allows us to look at, to give the appropriate warnings to various communities. And I would say the previous hurricane was a very good example of that. Obviously, within this, there's unpredictable variables that take into place. So that's one of the things, having the right data allows us to be able to be prepared. But there's a lot of mitigation measures that, as Mr. Hutchings has been talking about, we do need to take a look at as the severe hurricanes, hit certain communities. What are the mitigation measures that need to be put in place so that it can reduce the impacts of those? And again, we'll work with the provinces and the territories to take a look at what type of impacts, and especially for the Atlantic provinces. When Minister Hutchings and I visited some of the impacted communities, we met with the provincial leadership as well to take a look at how we can work together to support some of the smaller municipalities. One thing I will say, one key takeaway that it took both of us, I think Minister Hutchings and I took away, was that how communities are working together. So rather than looking at one small community that may not have the resources, they're grouping together to taking a look at how they can bring their resources together to put the preventative measures in place, to look at evacuation centers that they can all rely upon, and having a planning in place that supports one another. So that's something that was I was quite impressed with. And those are some of the initiatives that we'll look at supporting and work with the provinces to support the municipalities.
Maybe I can just add to what Minister Sajjan said. I think, in the era in which we live, we are continuing to have to do more with respect to adaptation to what is a changing climate. And certainly, I think we've made enormous progress. We will need to continue to do more going forward. But I would tell you, much of this work happens in Minister Sajjan's department, but it also happens in other departments. In my department, the work that we did with the provinces and territories on a wildland mitigation and prevention strategy for wildfires that was released just a couple of months ago has a whole range of elements in it that relate to municipalities, including the further implementation of the Fire Smart program, which is really, really important for municipalities. The work that we have done with the International Association of Firefighters and are continuing to do to actually train municipal firefighters to be able to actually help us much more in the interface areas between wildlands and municipalities that are proximate to those wildlands. And then in other areas, the work that is being done in Natural Resources Canada on flood mapping is critically important in the context of thinking about how we better adapt to some of these things that are going forward. So I would tell you, this government certainly is very focused on doing this. We are being very proactive. We recognize that municipalities need to be part of this conversation, and they very much are. And we also recognize that we are going to need to continue to do more moving forward to ensure that we are adapting, but we also need to do things to ensure that we are not making things worse. And therefore, having a credible plan on mitigation issues and climate issues is enormously important if we actually want to start to stop the acceleration in the destruction that is happening in our country.
And Zach, if I can just add, all the financial assistance that we've given the province, especially with the recent Hurricane Fiona and the disaster financial assistance arrangements, all the infrastructure that goes back has to be bigger and bigger and stronger. I know Parks Canada, Small Craft Harbors, DFO, everything is built a meter higher. When culverts are washed out, they go back bigger. So we're working with the municipalities that we are building back bigger and stronger for the next weather event when it comes. And that is in partnerships with the municipalities and the provinces and, of course, of us. We know there's a lot to do, and we're there to help people make sure that they are building back better and stronger. Like I said, the town that I'm in today, they're welcoming their generator next week because they will now have a warming station here in this small town to be able to bring people in for the next event that happens. And sadly, there will be more. So by working together, we'll be able to help Canadians wherever you may live to battle that next weather event.
Thanks. And I'm not sure who can answer this one best, but do you think that the funding is going far enough for those communities in regards to hurricanes?
Zach, there's my riding in Newfoundland and Labrador, Atlantic Canada. We're an island here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We're surrounded by the Atlantic. We're seeing these storms being fiercer, stronger, higher, more, and the winds have been incredible. I was chatting with some fishermen this morning, and that was their comment, like they've never seen wind like they've seen before. So we're talking about infrastructure. Some infrastructure was built 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It wasn't built to power to offset what it's being impacted with today. So we all need to make those sensible choices and working with the provinces and territories and the municipalities to make sure we're building for the future. And municipalities are going to have to make some hard decisions. One of the communities that Minister Sajjan and I visited last fall, they have zoned out areas where I'm sorry, there's no building here anymore. We all have the responsibility to make sure we're having the residents build in an area that's safe. And then the municipalities and the provinces and us, we have to make sure that we're supporting the infrastructure to withstand these storms going forward.
We will now go to Emily Bergeron, La Presse canadienne.
Oui, bonjour. Ma question est sur les ouragans qui vont arriver plus souvent là, que la normale. Est-ce que, au niveau de ce que vous entendez, quelle province pourrait être plus touchée? Est-ce que ce serait nécessairement les mêmes qui ont été touchés par les restes de débit? Et sentez-vous que ces provinces-là sont bien préparées?
I'm sorry, the translation didn't come through. Jonathan, if you want to take that.
Do you want me to ask it in English or?
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. About the storms that are above average, like we saw with Debbie, what provinces are more likely to be more touched by this in the future? And do you witness enough preparation coming from those provinces?
No, thank you. I think one of the things that we're seeing is not the severity of the hurricanes, but also the tracks that are going into other provinces. Normally with the hurricanes, we were looking at additionally with the Atlantic provinces. So all the Atlantic provinces will continue to be hit, but we're also seeing significant impact in Ontario and in Quebec as well from most recently that we have seen. So the hurricane, one of the things is, at least with the hurricane, it allows us some predictability to look at what path it's going to be going on. So I think we with understanding the severity and the increased wind patterns that are changing, as Minister Hutchings has mentioned, is going to allow the scientists to figure out what type of infrastructure is going to be needed going into the future, so that we can build back better. But one of the things that actually is alarming myself and some of our team is actually the flash flooding. That one is becoming unpredictable. And with the flash flooding, you've seen it happens very quickly, sometimes within in a couple of hours, where the rain just overwhelms the infrastructure that's there. So that's an area that we're going to have to put a little more attention on. We're again working with the provinces to take a look at what is going to be needed. But I would say Ontario and Quebec are going to be seeing more impacts of hurricanes as we move forward.
And Minister Wilkinson spoke about the mapping that is redone with floods and risk of flood. It has been years that we've been talking about this mapping. Is it going enough fast? And if you can answer this in French, that would be much appreciated.
Minister, you're on mute. If you could just unmute yourself. Thank you.
OK. Oui, c'est un grand projet. Le Canada est un grand pays, mais nous avons priorisé les zones dans lesquelles il y a le plus grand risque des innovations. Et nous avons fait beaucoup de progrès. Et bien sûr, nous allons avoir les choses pour discuter avec vous, mais avec les citoyens du Canada dans les prochaines semaines. Mais bien sûr, nous voulons accélérer le travail. Nous voulons être dans une position de discuter avec le public très tôt.
Seeing no other questions on the line, I'm going to use my moderator's privilege to ask a question. I think it's from Minister Sajjan about the new approach this summer with the humanitarian workforce. And I wonder, I mean, maybe it's August, it's a bit early days, but I wonder if you have any early learnings from that, if it's gone as expected, and where you see it going forward for the balance of the summer.
Actually, no, thank you very much for that question, because it's the we always talk about the response for the fires, which is absolutely critical, or responding to the floods. But when Canadians are impacted, we need to make sure that they have the appropriate support. That's one key lesson that we took away from last year, that we need greater support to making sure that we do have an appropriate response force. And that's where the humanitarian workforce program came in. They've been working very effectively, obviously in British Columbia, where we had the pilot project, in the Northwest Territories as well. But this also included, even though the pilot project was in part of the other parts of the country, they were still very effective. I'll just give you a very quick example. We're in talks right now with Sarvac to take a look at the number of people that have been trained for Type 3 wildfire response. And this will increase our ability for Type 3 wildfire response to supplement the Type 1 and the Type 2 as well. In addition to this, the new organization, Team Rubicon, that we added to the humanitarian workforce is right now, I believe the agreement has been signed for them to come and support the community of Jasper when it comes to removal of debris and so forth. So the program is working well, but one of the key things and the key takeaways from this, what we're looking at, is not what we're doing now, but where we want to go with this. And we've been working with other nations to looking at what systems have worked well for them, and how to look at this humanitarian workforce program and put more greater, I would say, systems around it through the Government Operations Center, so it can be multiple organizations that we can rely upon to support various disasters. So I would say it has worked well. We will kind of reevaluate the lessons that we have learned this year. There are some key things, I'll be honest with you. There are some things that already we need to work on, where we need to have agreements in place early on so that the response could be a little bit faster. But these are some of the things that we'll continue to learn this year and make better for next year.
And just as a follow-up, though, I mean, isn't that approach also effectively privately contracting out the government's own responsibility? Shouldn't it be the government to some degree that is dealing with this, not private companies?
No, so this is not private companies at all. These are organizations that are NGOs that already do amazing work across the country. What we're doing here is actually taking a lot of organizations who do amazing work when it comes to supporting disasters, and we're actually coordinating their efforts. So this already has existed across the country. What we're doing is actually coordinating their efforts through a federal way. And this, I would say, this is probably the best response. One of the things what we want to do is we can't if you want to have a more effective response every single year, you want to look at the tools that you actually have and make them better. And that's what we have been doing. So we looked at the lessons from last year. One of the key takeaways that we received from, for example, the West Kelowna wildfire or the Northwest Territories, but there were lack of people being able to respond to the Canadians' needs when they were evacuated. So that's why the humanitarian workforce program was put into place. A lot of organizations put their volunteer and put their hands up, but what we didn't have was a coordinating body to get this done. So essentially what we have done is put funding into these organizations to increase their capacity, and now what we have done is now pool their resources, and we're able to coordinate them a lot better. Down the road, what we're looking at eventually creating, and we're still in the early days, is looking at what would a federal response actually look like. So what you're seeing right now is us trying to respond to the disasters as quickly as possible, build on the tools that we have as we look at what the potential federal response capability will be under the Government Operations Center.
Thanks, Minister. We have time, I think, for one more question. Emily, I still see you have your hand up. Would you like to? Oh, actually, a colleague who has not asked a question yet. We'll go with Anaïs from Radio Canada. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I know it's been asked in the past, but what are the prognostics of having something similar to FEMA, like the Federal Emergency Agency in the States, here in Canada?
I'm glad you asked that question. This is something that I have been looking at for some time. FEMA is an organization that works very well, but they have a system federally that responds that works well for them. One of the things that we need to for Canada, our disaster response capabilities is based within the province and territories. So for us to be able to look at what a federal response is needed, it has to work in hand in glove with the province and territories. So the first and foremost for us is to making sure that we put additional resources to the province and territories, as Minister Wilkinson has been outlined with some of our funding that we've already put into place. That is the best way to making sure that we have enough resources to deal with the threats of climate change that we're dealing with. So what we have been doing now is looking at putting additional federal resources in place with the humanitarian workforce program. Eventually, we have to take a look at what will our for lack of better, our FEMA at the national level will look like. We need to take a look at not just what the US is doing, it works well for them, but we're also talking to Australia, looking at their measures. I'll be heading to Germany, hopefully in the fall, to take a look at their measures. And we've started even discussions with the French as well. And through this, we'll be able to share our lessons and look what is the best way to respond. And the key thing also is, as much as we'd like to make a decision at the federal level on what type of response capability is needed, we do need to work with the provinces and territories. So we had a number of discussions this way, and the key takeaway for us has been we need to put more resources at the front lines, which we have been doing. And so moving forward, we will look at what a federal response capability. It's the reason why the Prime Minister actually created this portfolio to take a look at what is going to be needed. The impacts of climate change had us deploying the Canadian Armed Forces on such a frequent basis that it was impacting them. And that's why the humanitarian workforce program was created, to increase our own capacity from what we already have. So down the road, yes, I do see a federal response capability. It's too early to tell what this will look like. What we will take the best lessons from FEMA and some of our other international partners incorporated for what will work best for us.
Follow up, Anais?
Thank you. If possible, we've heard in the briefing that there's over 100 armed force. Sorry, the word in English escapes me. Des militaires des Forces Armées Canadiennes were on site. Do you have any sense of how they're feeling? Because I know there was discontent from some higher ups in the army having to resort to them for natural disasters.
No, first of all, when it comes to the Canadian Armed Forces response, and I've been on the ground as a member and responded to the Winnipeg floods back in the early days, and also as a former MND. One thing I can tell you is our Canadian Armed Forces personnel, when they respond to supporting Canadians, it just warms my heart and how they talk about to responding to Canadians' needs. Obviously, the Canadian Armed Forces is a very high-level asset that we don't want to just use as a typical labor force. So when they are needed and used, we want to make sure it's going to be used properly. In this case here, when the Canadian Armed Forces responded to Alberta, a clear case was there that the Canadian Armed Forces was needed. The Canadian Armed Forces does Type 3 wildfire training before they even respond, so they're ready to go. Originally, the Canadian Armed Forces were going to be used up in northern Alberta, but at the same time as we're looking at the RFA process for this, the devastating impact was taking place in Jasper, so the resources were shifted. One of the things that we want to make sure is the Type 3 wildfire response, yes, when it's needed, it can be utilized. We are looking at building a capability separate from the Canadian Armed Forces, as I mentioned to you, through SARVAC, who have hundreds of people who either have training or had training that has been expired. And this allows the Canadian Armed Forces, through the Government Operations Center, to look at all the different organizations that we have through the various NGOs, through the Humanitarian Workforce Program, the Canadian Armed Forces. But let's not forget all of our other agencies, like Parks Canada. I have to admit, when I visited Jasper, and to see the effectiveness and the professionalism that they bring to the table, it was absolutely amazing. And how when I landed and visited the Jasper with the premier and the mayor. Canada Task Force 2, which we federally fund, was already on the ground, integrated in Parks Canada with Alberta Fire. It was amazing to see how the integration actually takes place. So yes, there are a lot of different resources. At times, the Canadian Armed Forces will need to be called out, and we will be very judicious in making sure that they're used appropriately.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. That brings to an end our press conference for today. Thank you so much to the ministers and parliamentary secretaries and my colleagues, and I wish you all a safe remainder of August. Take good care. Bye for now.
Bye, friends.